Walter. I'm sure most of your Belfast listeners know the Black Man's statue. Well, he's one half of our story today. In the middle of January 1841, Belfast was to witness for a number of days tension in the town, occasioned by the visit of the mighty Dan O'Connell, and opposition to that visit by the redoubtable Reverend Dr Henry Cooke, whose statue today stands as the Black Man, prominently in College Square East. My friend Bully Cooke, the Cock of the North, O'Connell told the people of Dublin, where he was Lord Mayor, has written to me the most insulting letter he could pen. Apparently, Dr Cooke had invited O'Connell to a debate with him in Belfast, when he had heard that Dan intended to visit here. Cooke wrote, "I believe you are a great bad man, engaged in a great bad cause." Now, who was O'Connell, who was Cooke, and what was the cause which so infuriated Cooke? Daniel O'Connell was a Kerry man, born in the year 1775 on the 6th of August. The O'Connells had been prominent Catholics in Kerry for generations and had been able to retain their lands throughout the 18th century, despite the enactment of the penal laws. Young Dan, who was brought up by an uncle in Derrynan Abbey, was educated in France and afterwards became a lawyer. By the year 1800, he was prominent at the bar, and one who so much opposed the Act of Union, which abolished the old Irish Parliament and created the legislative union between the British and Irish parliaments, that he said that if offered the alternative of the Union or the return of the penal laws in their full severity, he would choose the latter. Catholics had been conceded the right to vote in 1793, on the very limited franchise then obtaining to all of the population, but were still unable to sit in Parliament and had other civil rights denied them. O'Connell was to the forefront in winning full Catholic emancipation. After a brilliant campaign in the 1820s, he took a seat as the member for Clare in 1829. In so doing, he raised the consciousness of his fellow Catholic Irishmen to a pitch unseen for the previous 140 years, and was a great hero with the Irish peasantry. From the 1830s onward, his thoughts turned to the second of his great campaigns, repeal of the Union, which brought him from 1834 into even sharper confrontation with Irish Unionists than Catholic emancipation had done. By repeal, he meant a separate Irish Parliament, but sharing a common loyalty with Great Britain to the Crown. Henry Cooke was one such unionist opposed to repeal. He was born MacCooke at Grilla, Machara, County Derry, in 1788, and after receiving his early education locally, was sent to Glasgow University, but left without taking a degree. However, in 1808, by this time calling himself Cooke, he was ordained in the Presbyterian ministry and received a call to the parish of Duneen near Randalstown, and later to Donegal in 1811. In 1815 he resumed his studies in Glasgow, and by 1818 had moved to Killilea as a minister, County Down, by way of Dublin, where he had studied medicine in 1817 and preached to various Dublin congregations on Sundays. In 1829 he became minister of May Street Church in Belfast, which was specially built for him, and where he had officiated at the marriage of Barney Hughes, the future bakery magnate. Over the years he became something of a champion to many who espoused the Protestant faith in Belfast and Ulster generally. He was out of sympathy with full Catholic emancipation, and during the 1820s had clashed with a number of fellow Presbyterians and challenged their orthodoxy over their non-acceptance of the Westminster Confession of Faith. One of these was the Reverend Dr Henry Montgomery, the famous Lion of Dunmurry, who left the main body of Presbyterianism in 1829 and formed the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church. It's fair to say, Walter, I feel, that as well, Cooke did not like Montgomery's liberal views on Catholicism and the latter's attitude to Catholic emancipation. He clashed too with the professors at Inst in Belfast, which in the days I'm speaking of was, in addition to being a normal school, a third-level institution of education, and prepared candidates at that level for the Presbyterian Church, as well as other professions. Cooke accused the teachers there, in a 10,000-word letter, of Arianism, or denying the divinity of Christ, though after an inquiry by the Commissioners of Irish Education, the college was cleared. Cooke would have included this charge of Arianism against Montgomery too. And so to January 1841 and the happenings between O'Connell and Cooke at that time. There were many troops and police lining the streets when O'Connell in his carriage arrived in Belfast on the Saturday evening of January the 16th, 1841, as the news of his arrival spread throughout the town. Incidentally, Belfast was much smaller than it is today, and O'Connell had refused Cooke's offer of debate. The town over the next couple of days was very quiet and calm, and indeed the Vindicator, a bi-weekly newspaper which had been started in 1839 by O'Connellite supporters in the town, and which had his blessing, criticised the actions of the authorities by having such a force of law and order present. But on Tuesday, the 19th of January, O'Connell was severely shouted down whilst addressing a meeting in Donegal Square. That night, as he was present at soiree for St. Patrick's Orphan Society in the new music hall in May Street, mobs and wreckers roamed the streets. They broke windows in the Vindicator's offices, attacked St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Donegal Street, and later, whilst O'Connell was resting at the Royal Hotel in Donegal Place, the room in which he was in was showered with glass and debris by stones thrown through the windows. The homes of well-known repeal supporters were stoned as well. Outside the new music hall, such shouts as "To hell with the Pope," "To hell with the big beggar man and his tail," referring to O'Connell, and "Down with rebellious repeal," could be heard. The forces of law and order strove hard and mighty to keep opposition groups apart as O'Connellites clashed with these mobs. O'Connell left Belfast no doubt badly shaken, accompanied by 4 carloads of police and an escort of police cavalry, and caught the packet ferry at Donaghadee for Scotland. As he was so doing, Dr Cooke addressed a meeting against repeal, which was hugely attended. In the course of his address, Cooke pointed up the great economic advantages of the union with Britain, and strongly alluded to Protestant fears of being absorbed into a free and Catholic Ireland, where he said, and I quote, "Freedom of conscience is unknown." Cooke was a man, like many Protestants of his day, who always harked back to the year 1641, 200 years earlier, the year of the Catholic rising to recover lost lands and property in Ireland, and when many professing the Protestant faith were murdered. O'Connell for them heightened that anxiety of theirs of being swept away by a Catholic tide. Be that as it may, the Belfast newsletter of the day, referring to the events of January 1841, stated that, had the authorities not been vigilant, Belfast town would have been reduced to a heap of ruins. Barney Hughes himself always maintained that due to this visit, and him taking a day off work, where he was threatened with the sack, was the spur to his ambition of creating a bakery of his own. And so the Hughes business empire began, and Hughes bread became famous in Belfast. Just a couple of interesting points, Walter, as we go along. The Vindicator newspaper was a broadsheet which attempted to voice the thoughts and feelings of the Catholics of Belfast town. It was in many ways the voice in the north of Ireland of the repeal movement. Its offices were firstly at 10 Ann Street and later at 20 Rosemary Street. The new music hall was opened in 1839 at the corner of May Street and Arthur Street. It later became the Victoria Memorial Hall, as some of your listeners may know. Music Hall Lane is still in the vicinity. The first editor of the Vindicator, and indeed the owner for a period, was a man who later became famous, Charles Gavin Duffy. Duffy was born in 1816 in Monaghan and married as his first wife Emily McLaughlin, the daughter of a prosperous Belfast tea merchant, Francis McLaughlin. Duffy left the paper in 1842 and later was the chief founder of the New Ireland movement. He became editor of the famous Dublin paper called The Nation and MP for New Ross in 1852. Gavin Duffy emigrated to Australia in 1855 and became Prime Minister of Victoria in that country in 1871. Interestingly, for a man with such a strong Irish nationalist background, he was knighted in 1873. He returned to Europe in 1880 and died in 1903. Gavin Duffy's son, also called Gavin, was one of the Irish signatories to the Anglo-Irish Treaty in London in 1921. Duffy's successor as editor of the Vindicator was a Kilkenny man, Kevin T. Buggy, who came to Belfast late in 1842. It is said that O'Connell thought highly of him. He died the next year on the 18th of August after a short illness at the age of 35, and his early death was lamented by a great many people. Thousands attended his funeral to Friars Bush Cemetery in Belfast, where a very handsome, large and thick pillar monument was erected over his grave by the Belfast Repealers. It is one of the finest of its type in the city, I feel. There is a finely executed harp with gardens of shamrocks on two sides. The monument bears the motto Fortis Pro Fide et Patria, faith and fatherland. Also on the stonework is a eulogy said to have been from a speech by Daniel O'Connell. In its obituary of him, published on the 22nd of August 1843, the Belfast Newsletter, a strong opponent of repeal and of many of the political ideals for which Buggy stood, paid him a handsome tribute and spoke of his intellectual ability, his journalistic integrity, and those personal qualities which endeared him to many. It spoke of the great loss which the general community of Belfast had suffered due to his demise. Buggy had earlier written the one-time immensely popular patriotic ballad, The Saxon Shilling. After his death, the paper continued in publication until it closed in 1852. Henry Cooke was a 2 times moderator of the Presbyterian General Assembly in 1841, 42 and in 1862. Having throughout his career a tremendous, if not dominating influence on his church generally, he was known to some as the Presbyterian Pope, had a strong repugnance to the restricted use of the Bible in the national system of elementary education, and in 1939 was an advocate for the Presbyterians having their own system of education. He believed in having strong links with the Conservative and Orange factions and was the firm friend of a number of landlords. Back in 1825, Jefferson College in the United States had the degree of Doctor of Divinity conferred upon him. Of the two Unionist-inclined Belfast newspapers, the Northern Whig was nearly always a fierce opponent of his politics and of him personally, one time describing him as, and I quote, the most implacable of enemies and the most vulgar too. It went on to criticise his use of language on occasions which it said would put a chimney sweep to shame. Trinity College Dublin thought better of him, and in 1837 awarded him a doctorate, whilst in 1839 he was given the freedom of the city of Dublin. Cooke travelled extensively to England and Scotland and played a leading part in establishing the Free Church of Scotland. He spent a lot of time on an analytical concordance of Scripture. Unfortunately, however, its manuscript was destroyed by fire in a London hotel. Cooke also was the editor of a new version of Brown's Family Bible. In 1847, he was appointed as the first president of the new Assemblies College in Belfast, a post he held until 1867. And in 1849, he was the first Presbyterian Dean of Residence at Queen's College in the city. He continued as minister of May Street Church until 1867. Cooke attended the General Assembly in 1867, but those present noted that by now he was but a shadow of his former self, his voice hardly audible to the listeners. However, he was a doughty fighter until the last, and in 1867 had made a speech in Hillsborough against the disestablishment of the Church of Ireland. Henry Cooke was a great family man, being the father of 13 children, and he and his wife and family lived on the Ormeau Road. After his death in 1868, he was given a public funeral to Balmoral Cemetery. 154 carriages followed the cortege. Today a very impressive monument is over his grave. His statue was erected in 1876, and Cooke's Centenary Church on the Ormeau Road was built in 1888 to commemorate him. The Black Man refers to an earlier statue on the same site, but Cooke still carries the name. What of O'Connell? Well, he in the early 1840s started to hold what were called monster meetings all over Ireland in support of his repeal campaign. Monster meetings were an apt name, for upwards of 100,000 people might be gathered. The biggest at Tara had an estimated attendance of 750,000. Here the vast throng heard Dan's demagoguery. The message always praised the people for their non-violent espousal of their national rights, but the tone was sometimes ambiguous in this regard, and the government was badly shaken by these great demonstrations. The discipline of the people attending them, either on horseback, in carriages, or standing, the banners, bands, and historic national dress was impressive. How, Walter, did they all hear him? No doubt the message was passed through the serried ranks by word of mouth. But in those days before amplification, one small farmer said of O'Connell's voice, "You'd hear it a mile off, as if it was coming through honey." Robert Key says he got the title The Liberator, not because he liberated Ireland from England, he didn't, but because he liberated the great mass of the Irish from their irrelevance on the political scene. He was always a great Queen's man and a personal loyalty which was very strong to Queen Victoria. However, the government acted. It banned a proposed monster meeting scheduled for the 5th of October 1843 at Clontarf, the site of Brian Boru's victory over the Danes. and O'Connell capitulated and called the meeting off. Later he was charged with conspiracy along with Charles Gavin Duffy and a few other supporters and given 12 months imprisonment, fairly luxuriously spent as it turned out. But the sentence was overturned in due course by the House of Lords. O'Connell never really recovered, though, from his reverse at Clontarf and imprisonment. More monster meetings were held, but the Irish famine of 1845 to 47 really dealt his movement a mortal blow, and this along with his fallout with the Young Irelanders, which originally had been a youthful group of his supporters, by now had found him too moderate, meant he died a disappointed man in Genoa on the 15th of May 1847 on his way to Rome. His body was returned to Ireland, where he is buried in Glasnevin in Dublin, though his heart was removed and was sent to Rome, a request he made before his death. O'Connell, too, it is said, never fully recovered mentally from his duel in 1825 in Dublin with John Astere, where the latter was fatally injured. From then until his death, people noticed that Dan always wore a black glove on the hand that fired the fatal shot when he approached the altar in church to receive Holy Communion. It seems in the duel, which was triggered by O'Connell calling the Dublin Corporation a beggarly organisation, Dan shot low to avoid killing Astere, but the injuries were still sufficient to kill him a few days later. Astere left a widow and several children. Today in Northern Ireland, Walter, can still be felt sadly echoes of the same sort of controversies that existed in those days. Unionists feared O'Connell in the past because he gave a certain self-consciousness to Irish nationalists and wedded that concept in a strong sense to Catholicism. And this fear was grounded in the fact that in Ireland as a whole they were in a minority and caused something of a siege mentality in some. Cooke, on the other hand, was and continues to be seen by many Catholics as a partisan Protestant who always acted against Catholic interests. Notwithstanding all of this and allowing every person their point of view, I feel that today we should all try and appreciate each other's differences politically and religiously, and accept that O'Connell and Cooke were men of their day and products of the particular circumstances and environments that produced and shaped them. Perhaps then we can come to realise that both were great men, but not necessarily good in every sense of the word. I hope this is a fair assessment. There is a fine biography of Cooke written by Professor Finlay Holmes, and for books on O'Connell there are many to choose from. My favourite is an old one. It is a collection of 9 essays on the Liberator, edited by Michael Tierney and published in 1949. Both books deserve to be read.
Jim O'Hagan, who will be back with us for the Christmas edition of Love 40 and a look at historical aspects of the festive season. Few things happening this week, quite a number of things in the run-up to Christmas. For Belfast Speakers Circle, the meeting is again at 7:30 tomorrow evening in the Kairos Centre of Knock Presbyterian Church, Kings Road in East Belfast, and tomorrow evening they have a classical soiree. There's a Christmas celebration with the King's Chorale, that's the 70-voice choir, conductor Dennis Totten. It's in Fisherwick Presbyterian Church, Malone Road, Belfast, next Saturday at 7:30, and their guest artist will be Rachel Thompson, soprano. All proceeds to the charities Good Shepherd Ministries and Scripture Gift Mission. Suggested donation is £5. Ard's Choral Society, they are presenting Handel's Messiah. It's on Friday evening next in Strain Presbyterian Church, Newton Ards. Tickets are available from Scrabo Electrical Engineers in Newton Ards at £8 or at the door preceding the performance. That's on Friday evening, Ard's Choral Society's performance of the Messiah. Carryduff, Northern Ireland Hospice Support Group, are holding their cross-community carol service next Sunday in Carryduff Presbyterian Church at 3 o'clock. That's Church Road in Carryduff. An invitation then, a warm invitation to come and support this annual event. All donations to Northern Ireland Hospice Care. In the Ardone Theatre in Enniskillen, there's a big production opening on Thursday and continuing till Saturday, and then with further performances after that at 8 o'clock each evening. Enniskillen Light Operatic presents Guys and Dolls. This sparkling show provides a feast of comedy and lively music set on the streets of New York in the 1950s. So that's Guys and Dolls, presented by Enniskillen Light Operatic Company in Ardone Theatre, opening on Thursday of this week at 8 o'clock. In the Old Museum Arts Centre, this is a look ahead to Monday the 8th of December and running until Saturday the 13th. There Ain't No Sanity Clause. Those Who Can't, written and performed by John Kelly, Rachel McCabe and Stephen Beggs. I'm told that this show may contain traces of turkey, and they say it could be the best part of your Christmas office party, so why not do something a little different this year? And that's Those Who Can't in the Old Museum Arts Centre, starting on Monday the 8th of December. In Ards Arts Centre, in the Town Hall Arts Centre, Newton Ards, there's an exhibition, Police Stations and People. It starts on the 4th of December, continues until early January. It shows images of well-respected photographer Bobby Hanvey, first commissioned by Down Arts Centre to document the changing times for the policing of Northern Ireland. These pictures bring a sense of the humanity and consequences beyond the politics and the press. And that's in the Town Hall Arts Centre in Newton Ards. Coming up in the second half of the programme today, Sid Waller has some wartime memories, and Hugh Robinson on his new publication, 1,000 Beautiful Things and Other Favourites. When I mention the King's Chorale, who will be in Fisherwick next Saturday at 7:30, here they are with a voice of singing taking us to the news at 4 o'clock.